The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I am Father Nathan Castle, your host. We're starting a new trilogy today, and it's one with a university and student theme. You know, most of my career has been as a campus minister. I've been on or around a university campus since I went off to college at 18 in 1974. And I'm recording this in the third week of August on the campus of the University of Arizona. The fraternity, sorority people are already back. The leaders of the sports teams at the Newman Center, the Catholic Center, the student leaders are away on a retreat to get ready for this weekend where they will implement the plans they've made to welcome new students. There's just a great energy that happens at the beginning of the school year that's still in my blood, even though that's not my principal work any longer. I'm certainly all around it and absorbed into it, and I love it. Today's story has to do with a young man whose name we eventually learned was Greg. I'm going to read the dream as Greg presented it and then go from there, okay? This dream came during the night of August the 2nd of 2022, so 4 years ago. Here's the dream as I received it and wrote it in my journal. There was a male college student who had murdered someone. The body was in the back seat of a car in a campus parking lot. The student was involved in some program involving volunteer service and needed some certification like safe environment training that he didn't have. He said he'd go to an office to straighten it out. Someone, a male, suspected he was involved in wrongdoing and was trying to prove it. That person was killed, and I awoke. Well, one thing led to another in this story. Very often our format is to take a dream that I've received, go into prayer, protective prayer with the angels and saints, make sure that my partners and I are safe. Usually I have a couple of partners on a Zoom call with me. We're in different places, but gathered together by Zoom. This story had more detail than many. Sometimes it's just a little scene, it's a sentence or two, but this one had a fair amount of detail. Nevertheless, we ask for a guardian angel. The guardians are always with the person that we're trying to help, and so they are always a great source of direct information. They don't really often want to spill the beans on the whole story, but they do want to get the process started, and they do want to steer us into some clarity where, because of the sometimes vagueness of dreamscapes, we don't really understand what we're dealing with. The angel that came along this time was called Grace, which sounds like a female name to our ears. We know very well that the angels are ungendered by their nature. This Grace said, "Yes, I understand that you're familiar with this name being more feminine than masculine." But Grace just said, "It's really just a flow of loving energy that has nothing to do with gender." And I'm here to provide loving energy to help this process along. So Grace didn't need to really fill us in on very much more than that, um, although she kind of did. I'm going to read from some of what she offered. Some of it with this just elegant language, I think. She said, there's nothing about grace that has to do with masculine or feminine. It's just God's loving energy moving through persons and space, matter and no matter. He said, it's good to be with you. I chose a name because there's a phrase that I showed Father Nathan that's familiar to you. That is a fall from grace. I was with Karen and Dave on this one, and Karen said, yes, so I know that phrase. And Grace, guardian angel Grace said, well, in storytelling, often that person had a respected status, and then something intervened to cause them to have a fall from grace. sometimes celebrities, public figures. Sometimes it's imaged as someone falling from a pedestal. And the person whom I accompanied during his life had a large fall from grace. And then here, Guardian Grace goes into some very helpful detail. He was a college student who accumulated academic awards and was quite identified with comparative success. He would identify two or three others who were as good as he was at whatever the subject was. He always knew his grade point average to the decimal point and paid attention to anyone else who might be near him. There was much scorekeeping. He found that was the way the whole system, even from early childhood, seemed to be built. One would always get more awards if one learned how to give them what they wanted. Well, I appreciate that because that's a large part of my story as a child, and really up until I think my sophomore year of college. That's the way the system seemed to be built to me, too. Um, he said that meant having to learn to prove competence on exams, but the emphasis was never on the love of learning on its own. It was too much driven by the need to prove externally that he was better than others. It was always an external thing. He had to prove externally that he was better than others. He did what kept being rewarded. He could aspire to academic heights that none of his peers could hope for. He wrote essays for the Rotary Club. He would volunteer to build his resume of public service. He amassed quite a trophy case for a young person. But he didn't have or couldn't receive complimentary messaging about the goodness of his intellect. He saw service opportunities as a way only to advance his own good. Doing a service project so you can have that on your resume and put a check mark next to it. Not really care about the people or the project. Karen said, yes, I've worked with a lot of people who all they learned to do was strive. And then Guardian Grace quoted me from my Stanford years in particular, because there I was warned that it was a very elite place and everyone there was brilliant, but it did seem like they were all valedictorians who played the oboe. And they had to put a lot of effort into these essays that might have been the thing that got them into acceptance, because at Stanford, about 95% of applicants were denied. So you had to be in a very rare atmosphere to get acceptance to the school at all. The Guardian Grace goes on to say he was never able to receive and internalize his own goodness. Every good attribute that he had was outside of him. Certificates, financial scholarships. Sometimes it even became clothing because he needed to look like what he aspired to be. It was always external. There was never a quietude inside him that trusted that he was good without needing to prove it. I don't expect that this is going to resonate with everyone in this audience, but I'm sure there's other people who, like me, had some of that going on. The idea that you always needed to show somebody that you were uh, better than others. At Stanford, they're quoting me again. At Stanford, the word competitive got used an awful lot. Oh, it's so competitive. But I'd say to my students, but you knew it was going to be competitive and you wanted to come here anyway. So I looked the word up. Co and com mean to be with, and patere means to strive. There's nothing in that word that means to conquer, um, to be better than another. It just means to strive along with. So, as a golfer, most golfers didn't want to play alongside me because my game didn't make them better. But runners might want to run with runners who have more stamina than they do, or I don't know, gymnasts or anybody that, especially athletics, but it could be other things. Sometimes people want to learn to excel at something and they want to be around other people who already do, hoping that that will rub off. As it turned out, Greg was trying to gain some scholarship money and a status that came with that scholarship money. He really wanted to be a Rhodes Scholar. He wasn't quite there yet, but he was, it was those kind of stepping stones. He hoped that he might one day clerk for a Supreme Court justice or something like that. And I knew people like that at Stanford. Um, but uh, along the way, he needed the endorsement of different people. And one of them was a person who worked in the university in a role that had to do with awarding grants. This person, Randy was his first name, had a real good heart for his work and the fact that the monies that were being dispersed in these grants were benefices. They were the generosity of someone who maybe was their life's work that they deeded over to the university, hoping that it would help someone else improve themselves and be of service to the rest of us. Randy felt a real responsibility for choosing the right people to get these grants. Well, Greg came along, and the way that Guardian Grace mentioned it, he felt like his way was being blocked, and he felt compelled to unblock his way. Um, but then Grace assured us we try to be economic in the way we go about this. We wouldn't be in this line if we needed lots of complicated help. So he's ready to do the thing that you do, that is to help people advance. At first, Grace slid aside, and the young man moved in, and he said, "I'm the person that you're here to help you today. I'll get to my name in a little bit." But that young man, who you already know is Greg, said everything you heard just a moment ago is true, which is a relief about being here. There's no advantage to trying to pose or project. Uh, Everyone here just sees things as they really are. He said, if I really wanted to try to continue to be slick and sly and pull something over on people, I'd have to go to a lower place where that is still tolerated as part of one's growth. But they've said to me, it's true that you had a keen intellect, and it was more keen than many of your peers, even from when you were young. That's why teachers singled you out as they did. But it's also true that was only one attribute of you. You lost sight of many other attributes that you have that have nothing to do with keen intellect. You paid very little attention to being a loved person, apart from being admired for what you'd accomplished. You forgot or you undervalued the idea of having inherent goodness detached from accomplishment. And here, it's not somebody else that's speaking, it's Greg. He's taken in these words and now he's quoting them back to us. He's learned that he really didn't appreciate his own goodness from the inside out. Never. He said, it's true. I was a graduate student who had aspirations for some, like a Rhodes Scholarship, Supreme Court justicing. Um, he said many people had chose an occupation and longed to become it. You know, they wanted to be that lawyer or that astronaut or whatever it was. And he said, I really didn't. All I really wanted to do was climb the ladder. Um, I wanted to be better than other people, and I used academic ladder climbing as the scoreboard. There were times when it was brought home to me that I was shallow, hollow, heartless. And then he said, I didn't do much dating because Karen said it didn't go well. And he said, well, relationships get in the way. The other person wants you to be concerned about their plans or their feelings. I just thought it was a waste of time. Um, and he found that he felt like if any of his peers that he felt need to compete with did get involved in a romantic relationship, he thought that was good for him because that's probably going to take some energy away from their work. Anyway, um, he um, he couldn't get Randy to bend. Um, he couldn't shine Randy, and then Randy was pretty clear with him that it looks to me like you only do service because you're required to do it, and that your heart's not in it at all. And the young man said that was true. I thought when people did service that was required for the advancement they were trying to attain, sometimes they fell in love with the people that they were helping or the mission. They were exposed to some kind of need that they were helping to fulfill, and they grew to love it. Greg thought that would just made them losers. So anyway, he said. In the end, I just couldn't get this man to bend. And I'm going to read from what Randy has to say about it. But Randy just told him pretty much flat out, I think you're being insincere. I don't think you really care about service at all. I think you care only about your own advancement. And I'm going to put that in my estimation of you. He had to give a written evaluation, and he said that's going to be in it. Well, what Greg ended up doing was uh, coming up with an idea. He said, what if I got him to come to the place where I'm doing service, and there's a park nearby? What if I got him to come to the park? He said, I got him to come there and I got him into a car, got together into my car, and I killed him. Just like that. He also said, I might have been smart, but I didn't watch much television and all those crime solving shows. I would have easily been the first person they'd looked for. And they found me right away. And then I was going to be imprisoned, found guilty, and then this is extraordinary, I think. Um, he said, I just wasn't going to live that life, so I ended it. He took his life. So all this through the story at this point, we don't even know that it's a suicide story. That really wasn't even the heart of the matter. The suicide was a consequence of the pattern that had been set that was really more important than the suicide that it led to. He said, well, in the end, I had a dead body in my car. They found out it was me. I ended up taking my life. So Karen is a therapist, and she said, tell us about how you've been since. You wouldn't be with us if you had done some advancement in the afterlife. He said, yes, and that's tricky, isn't it? Because I'm advancing again, but I'm not doing it in order to be better than others. He said, here they've told me that I have plenty of ambition, but I need to get using it in a way that's good for everyone. And they said to me that I'm capable of that. I don't need to be better than others. I just need to work alongside them. Well, he did gain that uh, understanding and then dedicated him. He said, my name is Greg. I have a long road ahead. Um, but they pretty much told me to put all of those thoughts aside, those thoughts of what drove me in negative ways, looking too far out and try to stretch to be something I wasn't. I was always living in some fantastic future of what I might become rather than, and then he said, I don't know, smelling the roses or that kind of thing. Uh, and he said, I tried to let that in. I needed to not even have a jaded view of that. Stopping to smell the roses was something that losers did. But then here Greg says, I had to learn that there's nothing wrong with roses and they can be enjoyed for their scent. So they've given me some little assignments where I had to do nothing more than some afterlife equivalent to stop and smelling the roses. I had to take stock of present moments and savor them. I had to affirm goods that were around me that I didn't earn. Um, I had to learn that I didn't have things that didn't have anything to do with scheming or calculating to bring about. And I had to lose the judgmental glance. He said, it's harder than you think because I got so used to my field of vision as a way of separating worthy from not worthy. And they said, well, do you understand that that was a secondary function? Observing a thing is the first one. Having opinion about that thing comes second. You could just observe things as they are and discipline yourself, something like playing scales. And then he said, I didn't play the oboe. Um, but apparently, you'd have to learn how to blow through it and get different sounds out of it. There's some sort of elemental process where you learn just how to observe who and what is around you without having an opinion that evaluates it. And when we get into the next two podcasts, we might come back to that because that is something that I've encountered. Um, I've run across a few people in my life that come to mind for whom that was a very big problem, that they felt the need to instantaneously evaluate others and circumstances in a way that made them difficult to be around. Anyway, he says, I just have to own up to the harm that I've done to others. There'll be time for that, but right now they're just having me be still. And they've told me that I will soon be making a movement. Um, he said one of the things they showed me was that I had a lot of good in me already, but there were some gaps. So they didn't want me to think of a gap as necessarily a negative, just um, an observable reality. I might have tried to hide a gap so you wouldn't know that I had one. Um, but then he said, well, they told me, well, there are some gaps that are really quite beautiful. And he said they sent me to the Grand Canyon to look at it. It's a great big gap. Um, and then he said, and by the way, so is the Golden Gate. And I don't just mean the bridge. The bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, spans the Golden Gate Gap. It's a gap in the ridge line of low mountains that parallel the California coast and allow that water to go into San Francisco Bay through that gap. They showed me that there can be beautiful gaps. Okay. Anyway, it was time for him to go, and we could tell. And so Karen said, well, who's going to help you with that? Who would you like? And Greg said, my victim. Karen just said, oh. And then he emerged and he said, my name's Randy. I was never trying to thwart him. I was only trying to see that the part of the process that I was given responsibility for was well stewarded. These were academic assets that would be allocated to the person who was chosen. I had a piece of the evaluation that might steer a committee toward choosing this applicant over that one. I saw in him a gap and I called it out. I wouldn't be finessed. I stuck to my guns. Those weren't my resources to begin with. You know, universities are built on benefactions from people who wanted to promote some good and gave of their fortunes toward a particular academic project. He was positioning himself to be the winning applicant. I had a significant opinion. I just told him, here's what I see, and I laid it out. I said, all these plaudits are impeccable on this side of the ledger, but on the other side is this big gap. I just don't think you're authentic. I think that you're good at working systems, and there are plenty of systems that need to be worked in a life, but I don't think you know how to do anything but that. And until you prove me wrong, I'm not changing my opinion. I won't surprise you with anything that I write about you. I will have told you in advance what I will tell others. And then I really like this line. The opinion that I had of him reflected negatively upon his character, not because I wanted to be unnecessarily judgmental of him. The only judgment that I formed of him was within the parameters of my job. Well, I've had to do that a few times in my life where I came to a conclusion, particularly about employees, sometimes key volunteers, and say, I can't advance you in this thing, or I can't have you be in charge of this, or I can't rehire you, um, can't renew a contract, not because I feel like I uh, need to make unnecessary judgments. I'm just doing my job. He said, I didn't feel like it was important for me to have an after hours opinion about him. I just within the scope of my employment and the responsibilities given to me made an evaluation based upon facts and evidence. I never had any malice toward him. Now, this is a man who's been murdered by this fellow. He's still speaking quite dispassionately and plainly. I love that. He said, well, yes, I was murdered. I've had my own processes to work through. I had no intention of being murdered. But once I learned that that's in fact what had happened, it wasn't too long before I just accepted that as the new reality and I asked for help. How do I do this? I haven't done this before. And when we go into the other podcasts, that's such a great skill to be able to say, huh, things just changed and I'm now in this circumstance. The thing that changed was I used to be alive in my body and then I was murdered. But he doesn't spend much energy at all on that. He just says, I want to now deal with current reality. This is the current reality. I'd never done this before. I'm not sure what to do. Who can help me? Randy then was told, well, there was an outside chance that Greg might invite me today. That takes a lot of humility, and that was not at all his strong suit. But I won't say that I'm surprised or shocked because I was prepared. They did tell me that he's choosing among options, and the option for me was on the table. And so then Randy went on to say, and so we don't need right out of the gate to have some big heart to heart. I can just say, you already know I'm not your opponent. You're even inviting me to be an ally, which is all I ever wanted to begin with. Now we have an opportunity to put that into action. Isn't that amazing? Hmm. Randy also said, I didn't have a spouse or a family. I was kind of married to my work. My departure didn't leave a giant void in the world. I slipped away and found a new place to be in new, good companions. And, it ended up being some kind of a promotion, sort of. There was similar work to be done here. All the things that engaged me that made me love what I was doing, there were analogous ways to do them here. So I did some helping. I wasn't explicitly religious, but I had help from Jesus who introduced himself and said, You have likely heard of me. My life was taken by another. And then there was also the suicide of one of his friends. He said, You have all that you need, and if Greg should reach out to you, you'll know what to do next. And if you don't, do what you'll always have done. Ask for help. And Karen says, That's lovely. So Randy just said, Yeah, I think we're finished. He doesn't need for me to condescend to him, for example, holding his hand. He just needs to allow himself to walk side by side with another person as a guide. He's done enough of that already. That's not as difficult for him to imagine as it might have been before. So Karen says, Well, thank you for answering the call. Randy says, Well, it's really nice to meet you. With that, we're going to be on our way, and God bless you for the amazing work you do. So, that is the story of Greg the scholar and Randy his victim. There'll be a lot to unpack in the next two podcasts. You might know our format. The middle of the three in the trilogy is what we call compassionate response to that story. That'll be the rubric under which we organize our thoughts next time. And then the third one is a spiritual practice that might um, present itself from some of the details in this story. How hearing this story might inspire in us some spiritual practice that we hadn't practiced until now. So that's it. So recall that I pray for you on a regular basis. When I do, I pray for your healing of uh, anything of body, mind, and spirit that upsets you, maybe something in your past that's lingering too long and continuing to take some of your energy and especially your joy. I pray for uh, either for healing to happen gradually and without your effort, the way that our bodies heal without us having to look at them and tell that cut to heal. Or sometimes we do need to have things brought to our attention so that we can kind of clean out the dirt in the wound. That's often the work of therapists and counselors. However it works, I'm praying for your healing and your good so that you can be joyful. So if you'd like to be in touch with me, and particularly if you're curious about the phenomena of how this all operates in the dreams and in the speaking and all of that, I'd ask that you read one of my Afterlife Interrupted books before you try to initiate a conversation with me. But those books are easily available. They're on Amazon and they're not expensive. They're available also in audio and ebook, e-reader forms if you don't want to read the paper book. But that's it for this time. So, um, again, I'm Father Nathan Caswell. I'm grateful that you've joined us for this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. Hope to see you next time. Bye bye. I wanted to let you know about some opportunity that's coming up in late January of 2027 here in Tucson, Arizona. There's a really beautiful retreat center that I have booked for the weekend. I have room for just under 40 people. The retreat theme is going to be befriending the angels and the saints. All these people that we share the universe with, how can we grow closer to them and befriend them? If you choose to take part, it is at a Catholic retreat center, but you don't need to be a Roman Catholic in order to take part. You'll have your own accommodations. They're a little bit like motel rooms, but they're in a saguaro forest. They're not very far from the main city of Tucson. They're within about 20 minutes from the airport. But anyway, I hope that you would like to take part in it. I think it'll be fun. God bless you. Bye now.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless. Have you ever had to do something so difficult that you had to deal with it in stages? Imagine dying suddenly with no forewarning, being in a car crash, a shooting, a drowning. You leave your body, but then what? How do you transition into the afterlife? For some, it flows all at once, but not for everybody. For some, the process of transitioning into the afterlife is interrupted. Maybe there's a need for rest or for learning, or maybe just the chance to adjust to such an abrupt experience. I'm Father Nathan Castle. I'm a Catholic priest. About 23 years ago, the Holy Spirit began to send me people who had died traumatically. They entered my dreams during sleep, showing me what had happened to them and asking for help. They had died and moved on, sort of, but they'd come to a moment where it was time to complete the crossing. With the help of the angels and saints and earthly prayer partners, we've assisted more than 300 souls as they complete their crossing. You can read about it in my book series. Afterlife Interrupted books are available on Amazon. You can also learn more by visiting my website, nathan-castle.com. God bless you.